Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Employees Through a Natural Disaster. Today's webinar is the fifth in our storm season series and has been developed in partnership with Queensland Government, Department of Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning and RACQ Get Ready Queensland. My name is James Flaherty and I'm your facilitator for today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Anastasia Karras from CCIQ's Employer Assistance Team, who will take you through today's presentation. Before we start, some quick tips to get the most out of our webinar. We'll be on air for around 45 minutes and there'll be a Q&A following the main presentation. So please use the text box that you'll see on screen to type your questions and send them through to Anastasia, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We'll also send out to everybody who's registered an email later today which will have a copy of the webinar recording, a link to the slide deck, plus links to additional information that will help your business prepare for storm season. CCIQ's research has shown that in the 2011 floods, businesses were hit hard and on average closed for 8 days and didn't really get fully up and running again for on average about 1 month. During this time, businesses will have had to change hours of operation, to alter rosters and staffing levels, and even in the worst possible case, stand staff down or let them go. Today's webinar is your guide to knowing how to manage your staff fairly and within the law. Anastasia, it's over to you to outline how our listeners today should go about managing employees through a natural disaster.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon, listeners. So today I will take you through what natural disasters are, according to our legislation, employee management after a natural disaster, risk management and planning, and employee entitlements during a natural disaster. So what are natural disasters? As James mentioned, in Queensland, we are no stranger to a natural disaster. We have often are subject to bushfires, extreme heat or heat waves. We experience cyclones and severe storms and storm surges, flooding as a result of those storms. And there's always drought, of course, within our Queensland state. We do have tsunami, earthquake, landslide, and pandemic influenza on the list as well. So the best way for your business to cope with a natural disaster is to have a plan before it strikes. Risk management. So getting your business ready for a natural disaster includes such tasks as developing an emergency plan for the business and organising proper insurance and training your staff in first aid and evacuation procedures. Minimising risk and maximising continuation of business through a business continuity plan will assist in restabilising your business. Now I'll just touch on the next few slides about that business continuity planning. For further information though, we have already presented a webinar in this series which goes into more depth on the topic. But basically the purpose of developing a business continuity plan is to ensure the continuation of your business during and following any critical incident that results in disruption to your normal operational capability. Business continuity planning involves identifying and preventing risks wherever possible, preparing for the risks that you can't control, and responding and recovering if an incident or crisis occurs. You might not be able to predict every kind of incident that could threaten your business, but you can develop a comprehensive plan that covers a range of incidents. For example, natural disasters, computer problems, staffing issues. Developing a business continuity plan involves prevention, so that risk management planning, incorporating and identifying the likelihood and or effects of risks associated with an incident. A business impact analysis would be identifying and prioritising the key activities of a business that may be adversely affected by any disruptions. And the incident response planning, so responding, is what involves your employees. So outlining the immediate actions taken to respond to an incident in terms of containment, control, and minimising the impacts. And that fourth stage is recovery. So recovery planning, outlining the actions that your business will take to recover from an incident in order to minimise disruption and recovery times. It's important that you record what you need to do in emergency and the preparation you need to undertake in order to recover quickly. Make your employees responsible for various tasks in the process. So what to include in this plan? Your business continuity plan should contain all of the information you need to get your business running again after an incident or crisis. It should form part of your overarching business plan and will typically include, important for your employees, an incident response plan. The plan activation and incident response team who will do what throughout an emergency, and the communications and contacts list. Think about the line of communication if you're a larger business. Who will call who and how will you get the message out to every one of your employees? It's important to have a contacts list which would outline the internal staff and their families, emergency services and external contacts, for example, suppliers and customers. A workforce management plan would include the management of all employee personal information and ensuring that it is up to date at all times and easily on hand in the case of an emergency. This would include their addresses, next of kin details, phone numbers and email addresses. Access to emergency services information. How will you as a business keep abreast of the disaster that may be occurring and any warnings that the government might upload? And how would your employee understand? And customer and supplier information. If disaster occurs and your business shuts down, what message will you send to your clients and how do you plan on getting that message to them? Keep your employees informed of this message as well, because don't forget they're your link between you and your suppliers and customers, so they need to be aware of what message you're sending as well. So test, revise and train. So recovery is dependent on having a detailed plan, of course, and directing you towards a cohesive and systematic plan for your business continuity. You would need to update this plan at least once a year, but you'd also need to update it whenever there are changes in your business, your industry, or the location that you operate in. Keeping your staff up to date with any changes to your plan will help to put them into action in case of an incident. Ensure that they're always notified that a change has been made and exactly what changes have been made to the current processes and plans so they know what to do if something should occur. Conduct drills and training such as fire evacuations, hazardous material spills and critical incident response, and ensure evacuation plans are well displayed around the building. And check your industry codes of practice for health and safety standards under the Work Health Safety Act 2011. The link in the slide there will be available in the PDF when we send it out. Okay, and on that, the evacuation plan. So this, if a natural disaster is imminent, you might decide to evacuate your business or you may be ordered to evacuate by local authorities. So having an evacuation procedure avoids confusion and possible injury during an emergency situation. So firstly, create a clear chain of command on that plan. Decide who's responsible for authorising an evacuation and what circumstances would trigger an evacuation. Work out both primary and secondary evacuation routes and exits and create floor plans that feature these. Post these in places that are easy to see around the office. Develop procedures for dealing with any hazardous materials or shutting down critical operations, and make regular drills part of your business to help familiarise staff. All right, so moving on to the next part of the presentation, and employee management. So what happens if you need to stand down your employees, and what is a stand down? A stand down refers to a situation in which an employer directs an employee to stop performing work for a specified period and does not pay wages to that employee. It's a temporary measure that's implemented during a period in which the employee cannot usefully be employed for reasons which are outside of the employer's control. It's generally unpaid. However, it's not mandatory for the period to be unpaid. An employer may provide more lenient circumstances at their discretion. Stand-down provisions can be found in both the Fair Work Act as well as in your award or agreement. Some awards have them, not all. So if they are silent on a stand-down, it does go back to the Fair Work Act. But generally, a stand-down counts as service and will not break an employee's continuity of service, and it is unpaid. So under the Act, an employee can be stood down without pay if they cannot be usefully employed during a period due to industrial action, a breakdown of machinery or equipment if that employer cannot be reasonably held responsible for the breakdown, or, most relevant to this presentation, a stoppage of work for any cause for which the employer cannot be reasonably held responsible. For example, a natural disaster. That includes floods, bushfires, tropical cyclones, etc. Once again, only if the reason for the stand down is outside the employer's control. An employee can't be taken on stand down when they are taking paid or unpaid leave already, if that leave is authorised by the employer or they are otherwise authorised to be absent from their employment. So what that means is if an employee is already on annual leave, then they cannot be directed to take unpaid stand down instead of their annual leave. They'll remain on their leave until that period is finished, and then if it's required, then they'll commence unpaid stand down. Now, an employee may also have other entitlements under their award or agreement that should be applied when they're unable to attend work due to an emergency or natural disaster, and we will get into that a little later. And just the final point on that slide there is a shutdown. So when a business is temporarily closed during slow periods of the year, such as Christmas or New Year, like we're coming into this week and next week, a business can shut down. So that is a different concept to a stand down, and they're not to be confused. During a shutdown, the business is deciding to close down for reasons that are inside their control, and employees can therefore either be directed to take their annual leave, or they're paid alternatives such as negative leave entitlements, or they are paid their usual rate of pay depending on what your award stipulates for a shutdown. But just to not confuse the two with a stand down in an emergency or natural disaster. Employee management during that stand down. So if you do stand down your employees, it's best practice to notify them wherever possible in writing. So that letter to them would include the stand down date, whether or not they'll be paid or unpaid, and the effect the stand down will have on their other entitlements, and the business's commitment to communicate with employees around when the stand down will end and what will be occurring to get the business back up and running quickly. Provide all contact details of any necessary management staff. But first and foremost, always check your award. If the relevant modern award does not contain provisions for stand down, the Fair Work Act has provisions for stand downs without pay. Also in your award will be a definition, most awards will include a definition of inclement weather and when a business can put employees on stand down due to severe weather. So for example, the inclement weather under the Building and Construction On-Site Award includes hail, extreme cold, high winds, severe dust storms, and extreme high temperatures. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, so what if an employee cannot attend work due to a natural disaster? So an employee may have entitlements under their agreement or award that are relevant in these circumstances. So if they can't attend work due to a natural disaster or emergency, which has affected either their home or on their way to work, many of them do have entitlements. So for example, they might be allowed to access their annual leave or to go into negative leave or access leave without pay. If no such entitlement exists then the National Employment Standards will assist in determining the options that are available to them depending on their circumstances. Make sure you have your employees follow a process for communicating their absence to you and what the line of communication will be in those instances. Okay, so what alternatives are there to standing down your employees? So before standing down your employees, it's important that you consider inviting them to take a period of accrued paid leave. For example, their annual leave. Some industrial instruments might permit them to take annual leave at half pay, which can be an extra bit of leniency to those employees in a tough time. If there are terms in your award or agreement that allow you to require the take of annual leave, you can do that. That means to direct them or force them to use their leave accrual. Or if the employee is award or agreement free, you'll need to consider whether it's possible or appropriate to require the taking of such leave and make a decision yourself. Where there is more than one work site and not all sites are affected by the event, you should consider options for sharing work and hours among the sites. Where appropriate, consider flexible arrangements like working from home, and any arrangements to alter an employee's working patterns would need to be implemented in accordance with the Fair Work Act and any relevant modern award agreement. So when making agreements to alter their working arrangements during a disaster, you still need to put that in writing and ensure that you're not coercing an employee to making a decision, and all agreements are made together. So when might personal leave apply? So if an employee has sustained an injury during a flood or bushfire, for example, they might be entitled to take their personal leave. They would also be eligible for personal or carers leave if the school of their child's school is closed due to a natural disaster or emergency, or if they need to care for their family members. So as we know, the definition of paid personal or carers leave under the National Employment Standards in the Fair Work Act is that a full-time or part-time employee or a paid employee is entitled to this leave if they are unfit for work because of their own personal illness or injury, or to provide care or support to a member of their immediate family or household because of an illness, injury, or an unexpected emergency. An unexpected emergency would include a natural disaster. So employees who have exhausted their paid personal leave entitlement and casual employees are entitled to up to 2 days unpaid carers leave per occasion to provide care and support to a family or household member who is experiencing illness, injury, or in the event of an unexpected emergency. And what about compassionate leave? So compassionate leave is 2 days of leave which is allowed to employees to spend time with a member of their immediate family or household who has sustained a life-threatening illness or injury or has passed away. It's important to think about the definition here of life-threatening illness or injury. It really does mean that, otherwise personal leave would apply. Employees other than casual, so your full-time or part-time employees, are entitled to be paid for periods of compassionate leave, and that can be split in 2 separate periods per occasion, so two separate days. The National Employment Standard requires an employee to give notice to an employer of the taking of any personal carers leave, and as an employer, you can request that they provide evidence of that leave as well. So community service leave. The National Employment Standards also include provisions for an employee who is a member of a recognised emergency services, recognised management body to take a period of unpaid leave for the purpose of engaging in eligible community service activity, such as dealing with a natural disaster. So under the NES, a duration of the period of absence is not specified, so it's important that as an employer you consider what's reasonable, having regard to the time that the employee is engaged in the activity, the time associated with travel, and the reasonable rest time required immediately following the activity. Your award or agreement might also contain further provisions here as well. So for the criteria to be met for it to be community service leave, an employee must be engaging in an activity that involves dealing with an emergency or natural disaster, must be on a voluntary basis, regardless of whether or not they're indirectly or directly taking a gratuity or similar payment for engaging in the activity. And the employee is a member of or has a member-like association with a recognised emergency management body, and either the employee was requested by, or if no such request was made, it would be reasonable to expect that that body would have requested their presence. So a recognised emergency management body might include the SES, for example, so a body that has a role or function for coping with emergencies or natural disasters and securing the safety of persons or animals, or protecting property or otherwise in an emergency or natural disaster. So this could also include the firefighting or civil defence bodies. An employee who wants to take an absence from his or her employment for community service leave must notify their employer as soon as practicable. And just remember as an employer that this might be a time after the absence has already started. And so just have a little bit of leniency through these situations. The employee must also, if required by the employer, provide you with evidence that that absence is because the employee has been engaged in the eligible community service activity. Okay, so moving on to the final part of this presentation, which is managing your employees throughout the disaster recovery phase. So remember that during the natural disaster events, it's highly likely that in addition to the direct business impacts, both you and your employees may well have been personally affected as well. First and foremost, you should contact all of your employees directly if you're a smaller company, or contact each of your managers and delegate this responsibility to your if you have a larger company. Ask the employee if they're okay, first and foremost, if they've been affected. The way that they answer this question should help you to frame the rest of your conversation with them on that day and moving forward. So consider that an employee who has lost loved ones or their home, they'll be more concerned about their personal situation than their employment situation. So someone who's not been affected may be desperate to know how they can help get the business back up and running. Ask the employee if they need to take leave to deal with their personal circumstances. If the employee has their own cleanup to do at home, or they've lost family or friends, or they volunteer their services, then they're likely to want to take leave to attend to these issues or responsibilities. So although you want to get the business back up and running, try to be flexible and accommodating to each individual's situation and assess them on a case-by-case basis. Advise the employees how the business has been affected and what the immediate steps are to clean up and rebuild. Only tell your employees what you know. So if you don't know what's about to happen next, then tell them that you don't know yet. But as soon as you have a clearer understanding, you'll communicate that with them. If you know at this stage, tell employees how the disaster affects their employment and their position. If you're going to have to stand them down without pay, or if they're required to take a few days of annual leave while you arrange the business recovery, let them know. And finally, offer your employees access to the Employee Assistance Program, if your business has one, or provide details of Lifeline. If you have employees who need support to cope with the disaster, some employees will have suffered personal trauma and others may not have directly experienced the disaster but still may be distressed by the events they've seen in the neighbourhood or in the media. And the rebuilding and recovery phase. So once that immediate crisis is over and the cleanup is mostly complete, you've had a chance to review the extent of the damage and what's required to rebuild the business. So you need to ensure that you continue to communicate this with your employees. So communication is key. Let them know the steps you're taking to rebuild the business and how long this may take and if this will affect the time frame for their payment of wages. Follow the process set out in your business continuity plan. Keep them up to date on what has been achieved and where you're at with specific recovery projects, as well as what your message has been on external marketing and communications. This will help them to confidently answer queries and support your clients. Employees will be far more willing to rebuild the business and will take more ownership of the success of the business if they feel they're valued and can make a positive contribution. Keep them up to date with the decisions you're making that might affect their position. So you might not be able to afford to keep employees on after a severe emergency crisis and will have to close the business or make a number of positions redundant. So let them know what discussions will be held as soon as possible. This is more critical if they've been stood down with no pay, as most people live from pay to pay and it will be causing added stress. Just know that people do get stressed out and upset during the recovery process, so be prepared for varied reactions. If a volatile situation occurs with one of your employees, try to calm down the situation and talk to the person who's upset and understand their circumstances. If they're struggling to cope with the changes and the progression to recovery, refer them to your EAP program or Lifeline for support, and just stick by them, have a little extra understanding during this tough time. The natural disasters that we've experienced in Queensland have caused devastating destruction and can take months, if not years, to recover from. Our businesses and our employees are pushed to capacity while we rebuild. So understanding and engaging with your employees through good communication practices will enhance your relationship in the long run, as well as helping you to rebuild your business more quickly. So how can CCIQ support you through this time? We do have the employee assistance team available on that 1300 line and our advice email box as well. Just on that, throughout the Christmas period, we are here every day. We're just closing on public holidays. So if anything was to occur over the Christmas period, we can help you out. We do also have the workers' compensation information line, which is on that separate 1300 number, where we can help you out with any query in regards to an injured employee or ill employee on workers' compensation, the claims process, or the return to work process. And we do have the CCIQ books and online store, of course, where we have all of our ER, HR and IR information, guides, policies, procedures and templates. And that's all for purchase on our website.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anastasia. Some great insights and expertise there for our listeners to digest and to factor into their planning for storm season. Time now for our questions. Please do send questions through to Anastasia using the text box on screen, and we'll answer as many as we can as we go through. We've had a few questions in. The first one is, what leave entitlements are there for an employee who has a family member affected by a disaster, but is in the family member is in a different town, city, or state?
That employee could access their personal leave to look after that family member, so long as it's still an immediate family member and they do require their support. So an immediate family member is mother, father, brother, sister, grandmother, grandfather, your spouse's mother, father, brother, sister, grandmother, grandfather. It doesn't include cousins, uncles, aunties, or that next tier of immediate family.
What if a company has no damage, but the employee can't physically get to work due to, say, a flooded road, and they can't actually attend their employment?
That would still be a stand-down annual leave or annual leave, dependent on the damage. If they are repairing their house, for example, because their roof has caved in, that employee would need to apply for annual leave, and the employer would need to be understanding of that circumstance. But if, like we said, personal leave, if a child's school is shut down or something like that occurs, then it is personal leave as they're caring for their family members.
What if the shutdown's a bit more long-term? So, for example, what if a business has to close for up to 6 months, for example?
Yeah, sure. So the same stand-down provisions would apply where employees go on a period of unpaid stand-down. As long as the business is actively trying to rebuild and recover, and the employees still have employment and they don't intend to make anybody redundant, then it's just a matter of the employee having making a decision themselves whether or not they can foresee that they could last on their income and their personal circumstances without pay for that longer period. The business would need to be a little more lenient in allowing access to annual leave. If they have access to long service leave, that could also be considered during the long period of time.
And what happens in the situation, which we often see if there's a cyclone approaching, that an employer will advise staff to go home before the disaster strikes? What's the situation around pay and entitlements for staff in those situations?
Yeah, so this does happen where you get to, midday and you know that a storm is arriving in the afternoon, and it's going to be a risk to the health and safety of your employees to remain in the workplace, and they should get home before the storm hits. So you do decide to send them home. So it is a stand-down circumstance as well, where the employer can stand down without pay. However, in these circumstances, it's more likely that we see the employer allows the employees to go home on full pay, as they've made a decision themselves. However, the legislation would still allow you to apply it without pay.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anastasia. That's all the questions we've had in today. So that wraps up today's webinar. Special thanks on behalf of CCIQ to our storm season partner, Queensland Government Department of Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning, and RACQ Get Ready Queensland. For more information and resources that will help you prepare your business for storm season, please visit www.cciq.com.au/storm season. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. I'd like to wish you all a very safe storm season and hope that you put the plans in place to protect your businesses. We'd like to look forward to welcoming you on another CCIQ webinar in the near future. Thank you.